Hey, I'm ZSH Plays, and today we're building a predator bridge. Welcome back to San Bernardino Zoo. We're building in the frozen north today. We've got our caribou habitat, a beautiful entrance, our little town, and now we're going to be here building a habitat with an animal bridge for Cougar so we can open the area to our guests. Let's go. We have a very ambitious habitat to build today. I can't wait to show you it. What we're going to have is a habitat for Cougar that is split into two parts on either side of the guest path, and there's going to be a bridge over the path that the Cougar can walk across to get him from the large part of the habitat into the smaller part of the habitat, and it will take him right over the heads of the guests. Once the guests have come into the frozen north and visited the caribou habitat and our little town, then this habitat will either be the first or the last habitat they see, depending on which way they go. So I want it to be really impressive. These three boxes you can see here add up to the required size that we need for the Cougar. And like I say, we're going to split the habitat into two and have the path going right through the middle of it, so it's really immersive. So we're going to take two of these boxes and essentially join them together to have a large habitat on the right hand side of the path, and then we're going to take the other box and have that on the left hand side of the path, and the bridge is going to join the two of them between those boxes you can see there. And getting that to work with a predator in franchise mode is going to be a whole lot of fun, but we're going to make it. Now, if you remember these rocks we made back in the entrance episode, these are what we're going to be building the Cougar habitat out of. And we're going to be using these rocks a lot throughout this area. I really like the cold, dark grey look and the various different textures on them. So we're going to be doing a lot of modifying of these to make the actual habitats. There's about 50 rocks in each one of these little piles, and I've built them like that so that we can spin them around to any angle, and they're going to look really good, and they're going to look different, so it doesn't just look like one block that's been used to make the wall. The first thing we're going to do is make this wall here so we can get an idea of what it's going to look like as guests come into this habitat, and then we're going to build the viewing galleries. So there's going to be 3 viewing galleries, 2 on the right hand side and 1 on the left hand side, and then the animal bridge will run between them. We're going to use the rotation trick here to make one set of the habitat walls. This is a little small, I'm going to make this a bit bigger in a second, but essentially we're going to use this, and then we're going to use Goron's netting, the same one we used in the caracal habitat. Now I've got to admit, I got a little bit lazy in the caracal habitat with this. To be fair, it did take me a very long time to build, but this time, instead of just spamming as many of these as I can until it's covering the area, we're actually going to do some work on it. You saw me doing it there to get it to be perfectly spherical. That was not fun. And now it will fit perfectly over this habitat here once we drop it down into place. And then we're going to replace the top with some new pieces just to make it fit the really modern look that I want to have in this habitat. So these windows are FlexiColor, and they're pretty much the right size, so it actually makes a really good top. We'll use a couple of these, and that will be the top of the netting where all the poles join onto. And then on the other side of the habitat, where it's much bigger, we're going to use Goron's original netting blueprint. And I've actually made this habitat pretty much the same size as it, so it'll only take a little bit of work on my part to get the mesh to fit exactly with all the rocks. Then we're going to drop a shelter in, just so we've got an implied holding area for the Cougar. Any sort of big cat or medium-sized cat, you need proper holding areas with protection for the keepers and things like that, so they don't have to directly interact with the animal. You do not want to be messing around with a Cougar. Now, this warning sign that we made in the entrance episode is going to be right at the entrance to this area. I love the idea of the guests going into the wild when they get to this part here and away from the safety of the town. And we're going to have another one on the other side as well. That's just a little bit of scenery setting, but now it's time to build the animal bridge itself. These can be pretty tricky to get working, and it's the first time that I've built one in San Bernardino Zoo. It's only the second time I've ever built one, so I'm going to take you right the way through the process of this. So firstly, we need an actual bridge for the Cougar to walk across. So we're going to use these African hut bases and some other pieces to make a nice looking bridge. The design for this one is going to be influenced by Hogle Zoo in the US. They have a bridge for their tigers there. I really like the look of it, so we're going to be basing it mainly on that with a few of our own touches. There's a few different ways of building these, but the method we're going to be using here is the climbing method. So what we need to do is make sure that there is a climbable piece through the center of the bridge that the animals can walk across, because the animals' hitboxes when they're climbing are very different to when they're walking, and that normally enables you to make things much smaller than you would be able to if you were trying to make it wide enough for them to walk through. It's key as well to make sure that any climbable pieces other than the central piece they're going to walk on is set to non-climbable, so they can't escape, so we'll make sure we do that. And with a climbable log in the center for the Cougar to walk on and 2 non-climbable logs on the outside, now we can start decorating. So we'll get some more logs in here so it looks nice. and then we're going to get some girder pieces to act as sort of structural supports. Don't want this breaking and the Cougar escaping. So we'll get a couple of these underneath and just get them in a sort of position where they don't ruin the look of the logs coming out the side, but you can still see them so it looks more realistic. And then we're going to surround it all with mesh. So we'll use the Grasslands animal pole and some of the mesh pieces to create walls on the side and a ceiling for it as well, so that the Cougar can't get out. And because we've got that climbable piece in the middle, even though this is a pretty realistic size, it's actually smaller than the one at Hogle Zoo, albeit Cougars are smaller than tigers. The Cougar is still going to be able to actually walk through this. Without the climbing method, I very much doubt the hitbox would allow it to get through here. And when the Cougar does walk through here, ooh mama, it really looks good. There's a cinematic at the end of this video which I think might be my favourite thing I've ever filmed in Planet Zoo. There's just something about a predator being that close to the guests and up in the air that is so satisfying to watch. Alright, we've got one piece of the bridge completed, and what we're going to do now is duplicate this and turn it into a bridge. So this is where it's going to run from, between the two guest viewing points on the right hand side of the path, along to the rocks just beside the viewing point on the other side of the path. And we're going to run it along here, and then we're going to run it into the mesh that we placed down earlier. Then we're going to take some more climbable logs. We'll get the longest one that we can, and we'll run this down to the floor so that the Cougar can get up here, and we'll do some more work on this part of it later to make it look better. And then it's on to possibly the fiddliest part of the entire process, which is joining this bridge up to the mesh, because the mesh on the bridge needs to perfectly join up to the mesh above the habitat so that there is no point where the Cougar could escape. And that is not a lot of fun to build, but it didn't take as long as I thought it would. And with some adjustments to the poles and the mesh, and deleting a few of the mesh pieces that we already have, we can get a pretty seamless join on here. The mesh is probably the hardest thing to build with in Planet Zoo, so I want to give a big thank you again to Just Goron for uploading this set of mesh to the workshop. The more time you spend editing this piece, the more you realise how long it must have taken to put it together. The different layers and angles of the mesh are absolutely crazy. You can see some of them here, and I'm very glad that he's done that so that we don't have to. Getting the bridge right is only half the battle here, because we also need to get the barriers for the habitat set up in such a way that it works. So the way we're going to do this is to use null barriers. We're going to run these around the left-hand habitat that we've just been working on and the shelter that we've got here, and we'll put this inside the rocks so that it all matches up exactly. And then we're going to run the null barrier right across the guest path and then onto the other side of the habitat. And again, we'll follow the walls around here, and then when we get to the end, we'll run it back across the guest path and then join it up to the null barriers in the left-hand habitat. So what we end up with is a complete set of null barriers around the habitat. We can then put a keeper gate in here. So we'll put this wooden keeper gate into the shelter. And then what we need to do is add the glass viewing windows in separately. So we'll deselect all the other walls and then just put in one wall piece here and make that glass. And then we will select for it not to be the habitat barrier, and we'll do the same with the other two viewing windows. Once we've done all that, we should have a functioning habitat, and the next thing to do is make sure that the Cougar can actually use it. That was not a quick process, but check this out. We've got the blue habitable area on both sides of the habitat and a green line across the bridge in the middle, and the Cougar can access everything. You need to make a lot of very fine adjustments to the pieces near the bridge, but when you get it right, it is so worth it. Now it's time to make things look good. So what we're going to do is start raising the height of these walls with some more rocks and getting a much more varied kind of top to this. And we're also going to use the big sort of jagged teeth-like rocks that we made in the entrance episode as well. These are going to look really cool as you walk up to the habitat. They're really going to stand out against the silhouette of the rest of the rocks. So we're going to have these in random positions all the way around the walls. And we're going to also use them to join on to the poles in the mesh so everything looks nice and cohesive. We'll drop some more rocks into the viewing galleries to start getting these to look good. This is just literally 3 of the same long faux rock piece, but it looks really nice when you match it up with everything else. Sits the glass in nicely, and later on we'll use that same piece to make a floor as well so that you can't see the join between where the guest path ends and the habitat begins. And then there's just a bit more work to do on the mesh to get it so it lines up exactly with the edges of the habitat. I've spared you the hours of fiddling around with it that it took to get this to look good. I'll just show you a couple of seconds of it so you can see how we move the mesh pieces and the poles around to join them up onto the rocks. Now, building an entire habitat out of null barriers can lead to some problems with the guests, and we're going to solve those in Franchise Masters. When you've used null barriers to create all the walls in a habitat, you can come up with an issue, which is that our wonderful and extremely intelligent guests here will often spend their time stood right in front of a wall, staring intently at it, instead of standing where you want them to. So the way to fix that is to select the walls that are visible from the path and turn those into something solid. I like to use the log walls because they're the thinnest, and because they're hidden away under the rocks you can't see them anyway. And if we do this to all the null barriers that are visible from the path, the only place the guests can actually see the animals from is the viewing galleries, and that is where they're going to stand. If you remember to do this whenever you're using null barriers, your zoo's going to look a lot more realistic. Time for decoration and enrichment. So you can see I've already put a few plants into the habitat and some trees. What we're going to do is build a rock pile for the cougar to climb on. We're going to use, again, a modified version of those rocks we used earlier, turn this into something suitable for the cougar. We'll put a cardboard box on it so he's got a reason to come up here. He can play around with that. And then we'll make sure he can get up here with some more rocks. They're not as good at climbing in Planet Zoo as they are in real life. I really like the rocks that we created for the caribou habitat, so we're actually going to steal a few of those and put them in here because they're going to look perfect in this habitat as well. They join the floor onto the rocks really nicely. So we'll slide these into position and then sink them down so they're just peaking above the ground, and it provides a really nice transition from floor to rocks. We'll get another one of these in along here, and then we'll take a look at it. Now, another issue that I'm having with the habitat is glare on this glass. It gets glare in the morning and it gets glare in the evening. So the way we're going to solve that is by raising some of the rocks and moving some trees so that both at the start and at the end of the day there is some shade falling on these viewing structures. That means that the guests and us in the end cinematics are going to get the best view. There we go. Time to finish the planting. So I want to use a mix of different grasses and shrubs in here to make it look really nice. And as I suspected, I think it was in the Prairie Dogs episode, the latest update has changed the way plants work in this game in franchise mode. The animals now lose a lot more happiness if plants aren't appropriate for them, which is not a change that I would have made myself. So we need to be a bit more careful than we used to be here. A lot of the animals in the zoo that were on sort of 98, 99% happiness are now down to like 92, 93% happiness. But I'm not going to go back and change all of their habitats. But going forward, we need to concentrate on this a bit more. We're going to predominantly use the buffalo grass, which is American and temperate and suitable for the cougar. Pretty much anything American is suitable for the cougar, seeing as they live all the way from halfway up Canada down to Argentina. There's not much they're not happy with, but I am going to mix a little bit of the Yorkshire foggrass in there as well, because that's a really nice piece. If we just use a few of them, the cougars aren't going to mind it too much. We're going to put a sign up on the bridge to make sure the guests know exactly what they are looking at. So we're doing a little bit of detailing behind it here, and then we'll use one of the wonderful Rice's fonts to let the guests know what's going on. We'll do a little bit of decorating on the path leading into the habitat just to make sure this fits in really nicely and people really feel like they're going sort of into the wild as they get to this part here. I want this to look like the entrance to a forest, so we'll get some bramble bushes in, we'll get some more of the Yorkshire foggrass, and then we'll get some of the saltworts in, scatter a few of these around, and that is looking really nice now. The only issue I have is it's a little bit grey, so I'm going to spice this up a little bit with a waterfall. Now, normally the waterfalls in Planet Zoo are massive and very, very impressive. We've done some work before on making much gentler ones. What I want to try and do today is make a much smaller one by hiding one of the waterfall effects into the rocks, so we're just seeing the edge of it, and we'll use that to build a much more subtle waterfall. This is based on one I saw at Zoo Leipzig a few weeks ago. We'll put some glass panes in here to act as water, and that is Cougar Crossing done. Let's check it out. We've got a new animal on the Frozen North map at the entrance. You can see the rocks of the habitat peeking over in the distance, and we're going to travel beyond this point. I am so happy with how that looks. And it works perfectly with the guests. Even in franchise mode, it's high enough above them that they don't run away screaming, which is always useful. And here's our cougar making his way from the larger habitat into the smaller one. He's got his cardboard box to play with here. I've just realised now that I really need to put some sort of attachment on the end of the poles where they join the rocks, so I'll go back and do that. Let's take a look at the whole habitat from the air. Very happy with this rock work. It's a bit over the top, but I like things over the top. I think it looks cool. And let's see some more shots of the cougar playing around in his habitat. I love the rotating line feeder. It's such a cool enrichment item. Our cougar seems to be enjoying it as well. let's look at where we started today in the drone cam. And this is where we are now. That's a lot of building done. They've made a few little improvements to the entrance as well. Next week, we're going to be adding in the most requested animal that you guys asked for in the comments when we discussed what animals to put into this area. Very much looking forward to that. Let's take a quick look at the members monolith. Thank you all so much for joining. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next week for some more Planet Zoo.